Thanks for joining us today on Innovation Nation. My name is Sarah Lawler-Muzquiz, and today I have a very awesome thought leader, John Pauly, who I've actually met in the more recent, but I'm excited to have him on today. John, can you please introduce yourself?
My name is John Pauly. I'm a security consultant with ProTecht Solutions Partners. I have a vision to bring, to make safe a reality and not just a feeling. I work with smart cities, companies, and neighborhoods to ensure the well-being of those that enter through assessment, design, and strategic partnerships. We also coach security integrators to help them increase their business, retain talent, and provide a better customer experience.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Thanks for sharing with us a little bit about what you do. Recently, I saw a white paper that you published. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that with us?
Sure. So the white paper was designed for the intelligent transportation system community. So your ITS, that's the infrastructure, the roads in cities. And so everybody is going to interact with a road at some point, right? And while we see those roads as typically just that, what we don't see is that there are vulnerabilities there in the smart city community. And so smart cities, a lot of folks look at smart cities and say, oh, well, that's a citywide surveillance network, right? Or that's smart lighting, that's, smart parks, things like that. And so I took a different approach with it to take a step back to the ITS community, because if an intersection goes down, right, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, that can be a bad day. Well, if there's a vulnerability at that intersection and somebody's able to take down not on that intersection, but let's say 5 intersections, right? It's a really bad day. What if they were able to take that network down and can cause complete gridlock, right? And we've seen this in movies, right? We've seen the Italian Job, right? It was the character that hacked in to the traffic control system and shut everything down and got the guy to go through all the red stoplight or green stoplights. That's reality. That's not a movie anymore, right? We can do that. And I wanted to bring that up I'm sure the ITS community has some version of it already, but there's new technologies, there's other things that brings, it's no longer the data center, right? It's no longer the IT, the infrastructure that sits in Fort Knox. IT's now at the edge. Yes. Everything is at the edge. And so all of a sudden, if I can access the edge, why do I have to go into Fort Knox, right? I don't have to have keys to the castle. I just got to have keys to the guard shack. And I can buy the key. I can buy that same key for $8 on eBay. There's no security there at the edge. Fort Knox is fine. I don't need Fort Knox. And that's where I come in and say, let's get away from worrying about Fort Knox. Don't get away from worrying about Fort Knox, but we spent so much time and money securing Fort Knox, but we've left ourselves open.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and it's something that most people don't think about. It's a concept, when I talk about, you bring up security at the edge, and you're talking about how it's so easy these days from a technological standpoint to access data and information. It gives me the reminder, the feeling of when I was back working in the HVAC world. And, back in, I think it was 2011, it was kind of a long time ago, to be honest, where, the Target incident occurred, where everybody's credit card numbers were stolen through an HVAC room. Somebody went in and got into the network at the edge. And nobody thought about that happening. Nobody thought we need to protect the edge. And so it's very interesting, John, this concept I know for you relates to municipalities and cities and public areas, public places. Can you share with us a little bit about the technology that you're seeing today that has enabled more security at the edge? We talked a few weeks ago, you mentioned there's a technology now that I think it was something along the lines of smart locks or certain tech that you can do to protect the actual lights where you are at the intersection, so people can't just break in and buy the $8 key.
Right. So there's a couple of different locks that are being sold to the ITS community. One through a very well-known, that was co-built between a very well-known lock manufacturer and a very well-known BMS. And then there's another one that's a standalone system. I'm more for the I like the ability of
you
having.
can say the name of the brand if you want. I don't
Well,
mind.
no, I like the ability that instead of having to have give out $100 key, even though it's a cybersecure key, still a $100 key.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got a system that's tied to an access control system, I can now make this my key, and so I can control via Bluetooth or whatever if somebody's coming. If I've got a technician who I don't know, right, who's going to be going to my cabinet, but I know that they've got to have access to this cabinet, I can give them access. I can give them access for 4 hours. I don't have to give them access. I don't have to give them a key and say, here, have this, and you have free reigns. And so I now control that as an ITS. And you mentioned something before, but with the edge, we're seeing more things moving that direction, right? One of the things that I heard the stat the other day from Intel is that 43% of the systems that are being sold today, IT systems, IT related systems, not just in security, they're being processed at the edge, right? Our not just our industry, but the IT industry that we are quickly aligning with in security world is moving towards, right? You mentioned the Target incident. I actually heard another one the other day that a company got hacked through a temperature sensor, a wireless temperature sensor in an aquarium. They had a big saltwater aquarium that has to have certain whatever. And because the temperature sensor was unsecured, they were able to get in through the network and pull all the user data out.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
We have to think of, it's not just one piece of the edge. It's you now have to look at how do we secure all pieces of the edge. And so each new piece of technology going in, and NIST has come out with some statements for securing the edge in federal spaces. That has yet to be fully adopted into state, local, and corporate locations as well. So those are some things coming out now.
So like when we talk about the edge, I feel like for the listeners, there's some people who may not be fully familiar with what we mean by the edge. Would you do me a favor and define it for us, please?
What is the edge? So in my layman's terms of the edge is taking our processing power and all of our intelligence out of the data center, out of the server, and putting it where the device is, right? Mm-hmm. And so in a smart city application, going back to that, working with citywide surveillance, you don't put cameras in good areas of town. Just be honest, rarely do we put cameras in on Wall Street, except to see, maybe some white collar incidents, whatever. You put them in the neighborhoods that you know that you're going to have problems. You're trying to reduce calls for service for the police department. At those locations, your network's not necessarily stable. You don't want to be rolling out there at 3 o'clock in the morning, hooking a wire up to a box. And so now you've got to put, instead of it necessarily coming back to a server, right, and just having a camera out there, now you're taking that server, making it smaller, and you're putting it physically at the device, so that if something does happen, you're still recording, right? If the wires get cut, if the network gets cut, you still have everything that occurred there. And so that's that edge. Is we're taking analytics, we're taking processing power, and we're bringing it all out to the device wherever that's at. Now it may be in an airport, that may be 500 feet from the server. But one of the other things that we get by bringing to the edge is that we're able to do things faster. Mm-hmm. We're able to do things much more processing power for very specific things. And so, I mentioned in an article the other day that some of the camera manufacturers now, their chipsets are now doing millions of processes in nanoseconds. I mean, the amount of data that they're processing it's unfathomable in the sense that, well, here's an example. We sent people to the moon with less technology than is in this, and it filled a room. Okay. With what they're doing in the camera today, this is ancient technology.
Yes, I agree.
And then we're seeing some new guys come out with some stuff that's even more so, where you're actually seeing higher megapixel count cameras with more GPU, but instead of building the GPU into a server, right, which is what you've typically seen in the past, is that the video is being processed on the graphics processors versus the core. We're now seeing them actually build that GPU into the back of a camera. So when you get a camera, instead of it weighing maybe 3 pounds, that's doing some processing at the edge, you're actually getting a 6 or 7 pound camera, but it's running an entire city off that one camera.
Yeah, it's very true. It's interesting because especially when we talk about security today, and I know your focus in your white paper was a lot about municipalities and cities and public arenas and venues, areas that can be accessed by anyone. But I think it's interesting because what we're seeing is typically in this industry, from my perspective, and as you know, I'm still up and coming, right? I haven't been in the industry as many years as most people have, but from a technological standpoint, the evolution of technology from what I've seen in the last 5 years has been mind-blowing. Like, I know technology moves 2 to 3 years. You see a refresh or an evolution of the tech changing. But in the recent, especially with COVID, things have been popping up right and left. And I think it's interesting because we talk about cloud-based ACS systems. You're talking about the 6 or 7 pound camera. Well, at the end of the day, as much as that camera may be smart and be able to do what it's doing, there's still a downstream or like a back end, right? That's still going to have to enable our edge. Would you mind sharing with us a little bit about how we can enable the edge, some of the nuts and bolts, and what that process looks like to making sure you're designing that intelligent system properly?
Sure. So, and you mentioned the cloud, and I want to break this real quick. The edge and the cloud go together, but they don't. So the edge is a decentralized data set, right? Let me put it that way. You can have the edge and not have a cloud. You can't have a cloud without the edge, if that makes sense. And so I can put an edge appliance at a pole, right? It can go back to a centralized server. It can be in a well, I'm going to use the word federated. That's going to lead back to other folks, but it's the best term for what I'm trying to say. In a federated architecture, you can put something at the edge and it can still talk back to this centralized server. This centralized server just may be in the cloud. Versus if I have a cloud, I have to have an edge somewhere. I can't.
Well, what would be the point of the cloud if there's nothing, if there's no processing or things being done at an edge? Like, what's the point of it if you don't have, what are you storing? Or what are you syncing? Or what are you?
Exactly. You're not syncing anything. You've got to have that. You've got to have that edge, right? You know, and I still, you know, I love the memes that say that, you know, the cloud is somebody else's data center. We can't forget that, right? Whether it's your server or somebody else's server, it's still a server somewhere. It's not just this thing up in this, you know, thunder cloud and goes, yeah, it's not a cloud. And so it is a data center somewhere. It is a server, and the edge is reporting back to it. So whether it's your own cloud or somebody else's. But that being said, you know, the nuts and bolts are, we're putting things on a pole. Well, you got to take into account within cities, and I recently wrote an article as a follow-up piece to the cover article for Security Business Magazine, and I'll give Mexico City, the Mexico City Smart City application. I've done some smart city applications. You will never see, I won't say never, you will probably never see in the US what happened in Mexico City. It took 2 years of work for them. They've done an amazing thing. They actually broke away some of their 4G spectrum just for public safety. They've got a really great integrator who was able to capitalize on that. They put 13,000 cameras on cellular network with an
Holy cow.
expected with an expected 53,000, and they've tested the network to make it work. Now that's being done on every pole. They have an eagle eye camera, and they have a Stentophone emergency call button. And they got, but one of the things you have to note with this is that it wasn't just the city putting it in. Nothing happens, you know, there's politics in city, and then there's politics within the city as well. And so for that to work, they ended up getting the neighborhoods on board. There was 140, if I remember correctly, different neighborhood ambassadors that approved the locations of where all this went in. When it went in, you know, they had to get approval for where the pole goes. They had to get the equipment on the pole. They had to get power to the pole. Every one of these little pieces is in the US is a stop, right? I may not be able to get a pole. I may not get on a pole because the electrical company doesn't let me. I may not be able to put a pole in the ground because of regulations. There are all these steps that if somebody's looking to go into that avenue, it's not just like your traditional camera system where you go put a camera on the side of a building. The building is owned by the person. You can poke holes in the side of that building and it's okay. You may not be able to do that in a city. And so that's where the edge now comes to, where are you putting that at, right? Is it going on the side of a building, or is it going out in the back 40 of even of an industrial complex, right? Somebody says, hey, I need to put a camera looking at this fence line. Well, typically the answer for that is, well, we're going to run power out there. We're going to trench underneath the parking lot. We're going to run, you know, fiber or something out there, and you know, and that's how we're going to get this out there. And that's going to be, let's say, by the time you bore and do everything else, you're talking $20,000, $30,000 to put a camera out there. I can put that same camera out there today for about $3,500. I can take, you know, 10% of that major cost, and I can do that at the edge. I can do it wirelessly. We can do it solar. There's cellular capabilities. There's all kinds of things that even on a small scale campus mentality, I can cut that cost by 50%, right? Yeah. Those are things that folks, the end users, are now looking at.
Yes.
Well, I want to do this, but it's going to cost me $30,000, or I want to do this and it's going to cost me $3,500. Which one's a lot easier to handle?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting concept, John, because with technology and where it's going and how we are enabling not only our end users, but ourselves to install and to accomplish the actual, what we may consider nuts and bolts in the old way of doing things versus the new way, right? It's not only is the tech itself changing, but the way we install it is changing. And the way that we literally connect the dots and put the wires together. I mean, back in the day, you had multiple wires. Nowadays, everything's networked, everything's PoE, everything's now wireless, right? We're doing, you know, WAPs and all these things throughout buildings, right? So we can enable the local equipment. It's all about how we design it, right? But up front. But with the technology changing so fast, you know, I think it's just interesting because we're so used to in this industry seeing things being integrated, and the security integrator is usually the one that owns this type of system and technology and installation. I don't see that being the case anymore. I feel like
it's changing. It's changing rapidly. So, you know, the DIY market has exploded because people realize I can make a network cable, right? It's not rocket science. 568B, right? I can figure out how to put these wires together by YouTube video, and I don't need a security integrator to make a cable. Your IT vendors, and I'll mention it this way, they're looking at IoT sensors, right? A camera may be an IoT sensor. It is stuck on the end of a Cat 6 cable today. If I don't call it a camera, if I call it a thermometer, it's an IoT sensor, and an IT person can plug it up and make it work. In certain states, if you have a camera, and North Carolina being one of them, I hold a license in North Carolina for this reason, is that if something is considered to be taken as evidentiary nature, right? If you can take evidence from it, you have to hold a security license to install it. Texas just got rid of theirs, if I remember correctly. They were one of 4 states that required it. You're seeing now states are now even saying we're ready to say that security integrators don't have to. You don't have to have a license to put this in. Now it opens a door that the IT guy can say, hey, I'm going to go put a camera on the end of this Cat6 cable, and it's now an IT device.
Well, you're seeing, you know, not to, I mean, just one point, you're saying
Yeah.
IT, you're talking about a lot of IT. What we're seeing is a lot of telecommunications and IT contractors installing security equipment. And to put it in the simplest terms, we are bundling Division 27 and 28, which are known to be the, you know, low voltage packages. You are seeing a lot of security integrators who are trying to stay ahead and stay at the forefront of the technology and evolve with it. They're becoming not just a security integrator, but an IT service provider, right? They're bringing it together. Telecommunications, they're not just providing like the parts and smarts, but they're also now starting to provide the cable, because it isn't rocket science. It is not that hard to plug in a PoE cable to the back of a device.
No. And the new rules that allowed, that have now allowed us to send 96 volts of power down PoE++ cable, down a Cat6 cable. I don't even have to have an electrician anymore.
No.
So for an access control device, for a camera device, for traditional security devices that my telecommunications guys are already running cable to, they're now running. I'm just going to contract with them. And maybe I tell them, okay, instead of a blue cable, I want that one to be green. Mm-hmm. But they're going to pull a different color cable. So your security integrator is going to lose that business, right? As we move things to the edge, right? We're going to have smaller servers there, but we're still going to have a server. We're going to have an appliance. We're going to have something, right? You're going to have a big server somewhere else, potentially still running stuff. Your traditional IT vendors are going to say, hey, that's mine. I understand hyperconverged server technology. I understand how to make this work. And when and I work with a lot of integrators, but you say the words hyperconverged, and most of them look at you and go, you got 4 heads. What is hyperconverged?
They cross their eyes. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so for your traditional, your HP and your Dells, those guys get that. And so if in your specification, it calls for $1 million worth of servers, well, your IT guy just says, well, I understand hyperconverged. Hold on a minute. So out of that spec, they just pulled $1 million out of it. Well, if your security integrator saw that and he's like, hey, I got $1.3 million worth of this in cabling and devicing and server. Well, I just lost $1 million to IT to take the server. I just lost $100,000 in that going to cabling because the telecommunications guy is going to pull that. Out of that $1.3 million, you're getting, security integrators are getting $200,000.
It's just, it's product pushing. It's just pushing product. That's it. That's
one of the things I want to mention is that, with a stat I heard recently from one of the camera manufacturers was 60% of the cameras still being sold by integrators today are analog cameras. There is no edge in analog. There is no edge in analog, right? There's no analytics in analog.
You can't even really get it on. It's not the proper. You can't. Analog shouldn't even exist anymore, from my perspective. Why does it exist?
There are some reasons. Cost is there. It's because it was always there. Here's the way I look at it. In 2010, I was working for an integrator, and the big term was the convergence of analog and IP, right? We moved there 10 years ago. We've now gone into another convergence of IT, OT, and IoT, right? IT being people, OT being operational technology, and IoT being these little devices that all brings this thing together. That's how this edge thing occurred. But at the end of the day, if our security integrators are still selling 60% of the cameras that they're selling are analog, that means that they've missed the boat. And here's the point, and I'm not wanting to bash the integrator. I want them to understand. End users want the IP stuff, right? Tell me somebody who doesn't have the newest iPhone, the newest Android, or isn't drooling over the newest one coming out, right?
Mm-hmm.
They want it. In their personal lives, they're going to buy it. For their companies, they're going to figure out how to do it. Manufacturers are doing it now. There's very few companies now that aren't exploring cloud, edge, analytics, something, right? They're all seeing that we got to do more. We've got to push more of this out there. Consultants are specifying it, right? I talked with one consultant the other day. He said in the last 3 years, the last 2 prior years, he would have 1 or 2 conversations about cloud. This year alone, every conversation, he's actually been tracking it, every conversation that he has had with an end user has involved, how do I get this to the cloud? I don't want to own it. I want to lease it. How do I do this?
Wow.
So if it's being asked for, if it's being manufactured and it's being specified, but it's not being sold, if you're not going to sell the technology to an end user who wants it, they're going to go somewhere else and they're going to find it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I hate to use the terms from Jurassic Park, but life will find a way. And
Yes.
I've heard the integrators. I've heard this statement from another couple of folks. The integrators, those that aren't getting on board with this, are going to become dinosaurs, right?
Okay. I like that. I like that concept. I also am a big Jurassic Park fan. So, I think it's we have only a certain amount of time today, unfortunately,
right.
But I think this is a really good point to kind of leave off on, because I do believe this conversation will require a part B, C, and D and on, because this is just the reality right now of today. This is what's happening. I come from an integrator, right? I was an integrator for 5 years, and that's my blood. Like I love what I learned. Like, I'm so lucky I had that exposure. But it's interesting because I think what I'll leave off on is I maybe a prompt to the integrators out there that are listening in, right? The way we're moving to cloud, the way we're changing everything and putting it at the edge, I'd like to propose integrators just rebranding to become professional service providers. We are the pro services team. We are the managed service providers, right? Because that is how we are evolving. That is where the industry is going. IT is getting way more involved in all of our physical security conversations, and they're going to continue to be more involved. That's the only way they are going to have to be involved to protect the edge.
Well, and you're seeing some integrators, and there's some that are doing extremely well, where they've branched out to do the managed services. They've realized, now it took an upfront investment that they had to look at and go, do we do this? Do we not? But it was an upfront investment, and they said, we're going to prepare for the future. Those guys are doing very well right now.
Yes,
right? Because I'll give an example.
Yeah.
So I've talked to a number of integrators who they're still trying to figure out how to do support agreements. Some do it really, really well. I came from a company that's all they did. They sold support agreements. I talked to another company the other day that they sell 5% of their recurring revenue as support agreements. They don't have a lot of recurring revenue. Well, when you have a COVID-19, and this hopefully will be gone and all that at some point in the near future. Doubtful, but hopefully. The guys that were doing managed services and were selling support contracts, they had money coming in every month. They had, even if their guys were sitting in an office doing training, they were getting a reoccurring revenue coming in. Those that weren't, they're falling behind. They've seen their pipeline go from 6 months worth of sales to they're now at 2.5 weeks. And so those that are doing the managed services today, those are the guys you're going to see do more and more, and they're going to pick up. They're going to turn the tables on the telecommunications guys. They're actually going to be the ones doing the stuff for telecommunications and IT, and not losing the business to somebody else.
I love that. I think we can end on that. I think it's a great note, John, because you bring up a great topic, something that we don't have enough time to talk about yet today, but one that will have to be continued because there are just, I see a lot popping up who are just doing it right, rebranding, getting it, moving forward, and having this predictable income where they know what they're going to make and they have this security blanket knowing that they're going to still have their customer. Because just as much as they need the customer needs them. It's a
Yeah.
true two-way relationship there. It's not a let's get on and get off a job situation. Right? It's let's build the relationship further than just providing products. Let's make this a real working relationship. So I love leaving there because it's a really nice, I think, honestly, love letter to the whole industry, right? Like we started with security at the edge, municipalities. We talked about how we enable the edge, how we build out the systems properly. And now we're talking about the people who are going to do it for us, right? And I think that as long as we can bring this all together and we can keep messaging this properly, I believe people will be able to make the change, but it's going to have to come from within. They're going to have to want to do it, right? It's all about evolving.
It is, and you know, unlike the Big Bang, and this is to end with smart cities as well. It doesn't just happen, right? You don't just get a citywide surveillance application. You don't just get a managed services application. It doesn't just come into existence overnight.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you got to make a step and then you make another step, right? The old statement about how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. But you've got to start, right? Mm-hmm. It may be the daunting elephant in the room, but you've got to take a step. Yeah. And that's where I think a lot of folks are getting at it on both smart cities. Why cities gone the route of smart cities is, well, I don't have $50 million to spend on this. Same reason that integrators have said the same thing. I don't have $100,000 to spend on this. You got to start somewhere.
Yeah, I agree. And to that point, everybody listening, we are going to make sure you can connect with John. So we'll tag John within the post. And then also he mentioned a bunch of different references and articles. We will be sure to link those as well if you want to read them and follow up with them. And then John, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today. I think it was a great conversation, and I can't wait to keep this going, right? So we'll Absolutely. Do a part B down the line and we can keep talking about it.
I look forward to it.
Thank you, John.